My wife was traumatized by a stranger, in the worst way possible, so I defended her and went to jail in the process, only to find out my own brother set it all up to get to her, so I made sure he'll never breathe free air again. My wife never understood what I meant when I said I'd die for her, so I showed her. We were walking the street one day when a man passed by and purred at her. I instantly locked eyes with him, and instead of backing down, he smirked. Before I knew it, my face was meeting his jaw, over and over again. In between each blow, I could make out the words, "I'm sorry." But as soon as I thought he was finally walking away, he turned back around. "Is what I would say if I was actually sorry," he said, before grabbing my wife's chest at full force. My body completely took over. I didn't even realize how badly I had messed him up until I saw the flashing red and blue lights. As I got pulled into the cop car, I caught sight of the douche sitting on the floor in tears, acting like a little victim. Meanwhile, my wife was begging them not to take me away, but all I saw was that she was uninjured, and I knew I had done the right thing. After that, I was taken into holding, and there was no way in heck I'd let my wife live alone. So after making a few calls, I organized for her to stay with my brother Kevin, which was perfect, because he was also our lawyer for the case. After 2 days, Kevin finally paid my bail, and we all started planning for the trial together. And as much as I appreciated it, there was always this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, because sometimes, when my wife stretched her arms up super high, or reached over to grab something, I swear I could see his eyes running along every inch of her body. But I figured that after our run-in, I was just being overprotective, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. We spent the next 6 months doing everything we could to build our case. I even tried to bribe the douche's friends into admitting they saw what happened. It didn't work, but still, I was trying. But Kevin was better than me. Even though we were practically broke, he was putting hours every day into making sure our case was bulletproof. He had managed to find a witness to testify that he'd seen this behavior from douche before, a screenshot of his private story where he bragged about the assault, and, last but not least, a blurry video someone had taken from afar, capturing the whole thing. But in the 6 months of extreme stress and pain, there was one part much worse than everything else. My wife blamed herself. Maybe if I wore something else, maybe if I hadn't made eye contact with him, were all excuses she tried to give for his actions. I had to reassure her countless times that I would do it again, even if it meant being in jail for life, and that, of course, it was nowhere near her fault. Then came the day of the case, the day I realized that I was the one to ruin her life, because somehow, when it was Kevin's turn to present, he didn't use any of the evidence he previously claimed to have gathered. Instead, his folder consisted of a printed photo from me and my wife's wedding, and her emotional testimony. Look, folks, this is what he was protecting. Let's all be more understanding, aight? I swear I thought he was pranking us or something, but then he sat back down. My beautiful wife looked like she was about to cry. Meanwhile, I clenched my fists so hard they were completely white. The courtroom was so quiet you could practically hear a pin drop. Luckily, I was charged with 5 years in prison with no possibility of parole, because it was meant to be 10, but I guess the judge sort of knew I had done the right thing. As soon as I was in prison, I called my wife. "I know Kevin did this on purpose. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe from him. Stop, baby. You're spiraling. I know it's hard, but let's not point fingers." Her words stopped me in my tracks. She was always the type to see the good in people, even if there wasn't any. The more I tried to argue that he was a bad person, the more she pushed back. I wish I had known that it was the last time I'd ever talk to her again, because the woman that picked up the phone the next day wasn't my wife, for the most part anyway. As soon as I heard her voice, I practically yelled, "Hey, beautiful!" Her tone used to light up when she heard me, as if talking to me was the best part of her day. But now, nothing. I swear I thought she was pranking me, but that's when I heard her start to sniffle. I instantly knew something was very wrong. "Baby, Kevin, he touched me. I'm sorry." I had to stop myself from throwing the entire phone box at the wall. My worst nightmare had come true. I told her to use my card to get an Uber to her sister's house, that I didn't care what she did, as long as she was safe. "Okay," she said with a certain numbness in her voice. Suddenly, my time on the phone was over, so I told her I'd call her the next morning and we'd figure something out. As soon as she hung up, I felt like an attack dog let loose, because there was one thing I would never tolerate, and that was anyone who wanted to hurt my wife. After I was done with him, Kevin was going to wish he was never even born with eyes that he could look at my wife with, because I was in prison, a place filled with people that knew people who'd do anything for some quick cash. I spent that night pacing in my cell, trying to figure out what to do. My cellmate, a guy named Marcus who was in for armed robbery, kept telling me to sit down and shut up, but I couldn't. My mind was racing with images of Kevin touching Ellie, her crying, feeling trapped. I wanted to pinch the wall until my knuckles bled, but I knew that wouldn't help anyone. The concrete walls seemed to close in on me with each passing hour, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like an accusation. The next morning, I was first in line for the phones. I stood there shifting my weight from foot to foot, ignoring the impatient mutters behind me. I called Ellie's sister's place, praying she'd made it there safely. Her sister Jen picked up on the third ring, the connection crackling with static. "Is she there?" I asked, not bothering with hello. My heart hammered against my ribs as I waited for her answer. Jen confirmed Ellie had arrived late last night, completely distraught. She put Ellie on the phone, and I nearly broke down hearing her voice. She sounded hollow, empty, like something vital had been stripped away. I asked her what happened, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. She told me Kevin had been drinking after I went to P. Arson, saying he needed to take the edge off. He kept telling her how beautiful she was, how I didn't deserve her. Then last night, he cornered her in the kitchen, grabbed her wrists so hard they bruised and tried to kiss her. When she pushed him away, he got angry, said some awful things about how she was leading him on and that I was never coming back anyway. I should have seen it coming, she whispered, her voice catching. The way he looked at me, I thought I was imagining things at first, but looking back, the signs were there. The lingering touches, standing too close, always finding reasons to be alone with me. I noticed it before your trial, but I didn't want to worry you when you were already dealing with so much. I told her to stay at Jen's, to not go back to Kevin's for any reason. I also told her to go to the police, but she hesitated, fear evident in her voice. Who's going to believe me? He's a lawyer, and he's your brother. He's already telling people I'm unstable because of your conviction. She had a point, but I insisted she at least file a report. We needed documentation. Then I told her I was going to figure something out, that she shouldn't worry about me. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I had never felt more powerless. After I hung up, I knew I needed help. Not the kind that would get Kevin struck up or worse, that would only land me in more trouble. I needed legal help, someone who could expose what Kevin had done, both to Ellie and to our case. The yard was my best bet for information. I approached a guy named Rodriguez in the yard that afternoon. The sun hit down on the cracked concrete as inmates clustered in their usual groups. Rodriguez wasn't a big-time criminal or anything, just someone who knew the system. He'd been in and out for years, mostly drug charges, but he knew lawyers, good ones. He was sitting on a bench, watching a basketball game with disinterest, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. I need someone who can look into my case, I told him, sitting down beside him but keeping my eyes forward. I think my lawyer tanked it on purpose. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. The less people knew about your business in here, the better. He gave me a name, Maria Sanchez. Said she took on cases like mine, especially when there was misconduct involved. I memorized her number and called her the next day, rehearsing what I would say while I waited for my turn at the phone. Maria agreed to meet with me after I explained the basics. She showed up 3 days later, all business in a simple charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wasn't friendly, but she was direct, which I appreciated. The visit room was crowded that day, the air stuffy with tension and desperation. "So you think your brother deliberately sabotaged your case?" she asked, taking notes on a legal pad, her handwriting small and precise. I nodded, explaining everything, the evidence Kevin claimed to have but never presented, his behavior toward Ellie, and finally, what he'd done to her after I was locked up. I described how he'd promised witnesses who never appeared, how he'd advised me against testifying in my own defense. Maria's face remained neutral, but her pen stopped moving when I got to the part about Kevin assaulting Ellie. "Your wife filed a police report?" I confirmed she had, though Ellie told me the officer seemed skeptical, barely looking up from his computer as she spoke. Maria nodded, making another note, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Here's what we need to do," she said, tapping her pen against the pad. "First, I need to get access to your case files. If your brother really did have evidence he didn't present, that's ineffective counsel. Second, I need to speak with your wife directly. And third, we need to find out if this guy who assaulted your wife has any other victims." I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since the trial. Maria wasn't making promises, but she had a plan. Before she left, she told me to sit tight and not do anything stupid. "The worst thing you can do right now is get in more trouble," she warned, fixing me with a stern look. "Let me handle this. P. Arson is full of men who made bad situations worse by acting on impulse." The next few weeks were torture. I called Ellie every chance I got, counting the minutes between calls. She was staying with Jen, looking for a new job since her old one was too close to Kevin's office. She sounded a little stronger each time we talked, which was a relief. But she also told me Kevin had been calling her, alternating between apologizing and threatening her. "He says no one will believe me," she said during one call, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that it'll just look like I'm trying to help you get out of P. Arson. He says he can make things even worse for you if I don't stop spreading lies." I told her to save any voicemails or texts he sent. Maria had told me documentation was crucial. Ellie also mentioned she'd run into our old neighbor, Taylor, who said he'd been at the courthouse the day of my trial. Apparently, he overheard Kevin on the phone in the hallway before the trial started. Taylor said Kevin was arguing with someone, Ellie told me. He heard him say something like, "I don't care what you promised. I'm not using it." Taylor thought it was weird, but didn't think much of it until I told him what happened. I asked Ellie to have Taylor call Maria immediately. This could be important, maybe even the break we needed. My mind raced with possibilities as I hung up the phone. Meanwhile, P. Arson life was grinding me down. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, the underlying threat of violence, it all wore on my nerves like sandpaper. I got into a fight my second month there when some guy made a comment about what he'd do to my wife if she visited. I ended up with a black eye, a split lip, and a week in solitary. The isolation nearly drove me crazy. Nothing but blank walls and my own thoughts for company. But it also gave me time to think. I realized I needed to be smarter, more strategic. Getting into fights wouldn't help Ellie. After I got out of solitary, I focused on being a model prisoner. I volunteered for every program available: anger management, GED tutoring, even the Pearson Garden. I kept my head down during meals, avoided the yard politics, and read every book I could get my hands on. The guards started to see me differently, and that meant more phone privileges, which I desperately needed to stay in touch with Ellie and Maria. Maria visited again about 2 months after our first meeting. She looked tired but determined, dark circles under her eyes suggesting long nights of work. "I've got some developments," she said, arranging her papers methodically. "First, I spoke with Taylor. His statement about overhearing Kevin is helpful, but not conclusive. More importantly, I've been looking into your original case." She explained that she'd filed motions to get access to Kevin's case files, but he was fighting it, claiming attorney-client privilege. However, she'd managed to track down the witness Kevin had mentioned, a woman named Diane, who worked at a coffee shop near where the assault happened. Diane confirms she gave a statement to Kevin about seeing the same man harass other women, Maria said, sliding a photocopy across the table. She even provided a written statement and was prepared to testify. She was confused when she never got called to court. She thought maybe you'd taken a plea deal. This was huge. It confirmed Kevin had lied about not having evidence. But Maria wasn't done, her eyes lighting up with controlled excitement. "I also found the person who took the video," she continued. "A college student named Josh was filming something for a class project and caught the whole incident in the background. He gave the footage to Kevin after seeing your story in the local paper. He still had a copy on his laptop." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "So we have proof Kevin had evidence he didn't use?" Maria nodded, a grim satisfaction in her expression. "It's not just ineffective counsel at this point. It's deliberate sabotage. The question is why. I had my suspicions, but I kept them to myself for now. The idea that my own brother could betray me so completely was still hard to fully accept, even with the evidence mounting." Maria said she was preparing to file for a new trial based on ineffective counsel, but it would take time. The system moved slowly, especially when trying to overturn a conviction. In the meantime, things were getting worse for Ellie. Kevin had somehow found out where she was staying and started showing up at Jen's apartment. He would ring the doorbell repeatedly, leave notes under the door, and once, Ellie spotted him sitting in his car outside, just watching the building. Jen threatened to call the cops, but Kevin just laughed and said he was a lawyer who was concerned about his sister-in-law's mental health. "He told Jen I was having a breakdown," Ellie said during our next call, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "That I was making up stories because I couldn't handle you being in Pearson. He actually tried to convince her to let him take me to a doctor." Ellie decided to move again, this time to a friend's place that Kevin didn't know about. She also got a restraining order against him, though she wasn't confident it would help much. The process had been humiliating, having to detail every incident, facing skeptical questions, feeling like she was the one on trial. "He knows all the loopholes," she told me during our weekly call, exhaustion evident in her voice. "He keeps saying he just wants to talk, to explain himself. It's creepy. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking he's in the room with me." I felt helpless, trapped behind bars while this predator stalked my wife, but Maria assured me we were making progress. She'd filed the motion for a new trial and was gathering more evidence about Kevin's misconduct. She was also in touch with the police about the restraining order violations. Then something unexpected happened. I got a visitor, my mom. We hadn't been close for years, not since she took Kevin's side during a stupid argument about borrowing money. But there she was, looking older than I remembered, her hair grayer, her face more lined, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. "I heard what's happening," she said after we sat down, her voice barely audible over the background noise of the visiting room. With Kevin and Ellie, I tensed up, expecting her to defend him like she always did. Kevin had always been her favorite, the successful one, the one who made something of himself. Instead, she surprised me. "I believe her," Mom said quietly, tears welling in her eyes. "Kevin, he's always had problems with boundaries, especially with women." She told me about incidents I never knew about, complaints from female classmates in elevated school, a girlfriend who suddenly stopped coming around, rumors at his first law firm that led to him leaving suddenly. Mom had always made excuses for him, but seeing the pattern now, she couldn't deny it anymore. "I found something in his old room when I was cleaning," she continued, lowering her voice even though no one was listening. "A journal. The things he wrote about women, about Ellie specifically, they weren't normal, honey. There were pages and pages about her, details about what she wore, conversations they'd had, things he wanted to do to her. It goes back years, to when you first started dating her. I should have found it sooner, but I never went through his things before." She shuddered, unable to continue. My stomach churned with disgust and dread. Mom promised to talk to Maria and share what she knew. It was the first time in years I felt like my mother was actually on my side, though the circumstances made it a hollow victory. The next day, I got an emergency call from Ellie. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, each sob like a knife in my chest. "He broke in," she finally managed to say. "Last night, I woke up and he was standing in my room, just watching me sleep. He had this look on his face, like he was finally getting what he wanted." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white, bile rising in my throat. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" She said she'd screamed, and her friend's boyfriend had come running. Kevin ran off, but not before threatening that this wasn't over. Ellie had called the police, who actually took it seriously this time since it was a break-in. They were looking for Kevin, but he hadn't gone home or to his office. I told her to pack a bag and go somewhere Kevin wouldn't think to look, maybe a hotel, using cash so he couldn't track the card. She agreed, sounding terrified, but resolute. After that call, I was frantic. I immediately called Maria and told her what happened. She promised to help Ellie find a safe place to stay and said this incident would actually help our case. Breaking and entering, stalking, violating a restraining order. These were serious charges that would damage Kevin's credibility. 2 days later, Maria visited again with news. The police had found and arrested Kevin for the break-in. During the arrest, they'd searched his car and found some disturbing items: duct tape, rope, and printed directions to several remote locations. It looked like he'd been planning something much worse than just watching Ellie sleep. "They're holding him without bail," Maria said, a hint of satisfaction breaking through her professional demeanor. "And his arrest has actually accelerated our case. The judge has agreed to review our motion for a new trial immediately in light of these developments." I should have felt relieved, but I was still worried about Ellie. She sounded traumatized when I called her that night. She was staying at a women's shelter where Kevin couldn't find her, but she jumped at every noise and couldn't sleep without the lights on. "I keep seeing his face," she whispered, standing over me in the dark. What if he had gotten to me before I woke up? What if Mike hadn't been there? Her voice broke on the question, and I heard her stifle a sob. I tried to reassure her, but the truth was, I was terrified too. The thought of what could have happened was unbearable. I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my cell, imagining all the ways I had failed to protect her. A week later, Maria brought unexpected news. The district attorney was investigating Kevin for multiple instances of professional misconduct, not just in my case. Apparently, once they started looking into him, they found a pattern of ethical violations: suppressing evidence, intimidating witnesses, even bribing a court clerk for information. "They found emails between Kevin and the man who assaulted your wife," Maria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They knew each other. The whole incident may have been staged. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, the air leaving my lungs in a rush." "What are you saying?" Maria showed me printouts of the emails. They were vague but damning. Kevin had apparently hired this guy, whose name was Rick Lawson, to create a situation with Ellie. There was no explicit mention of the assault, but the timing matched perfectly. "We think Kevin wanted you out of the way," Maria explained, her disgust evident. "He deliberately provoked you into attacking Lawson, then tanked your defense to make sure you went to P. Arson, all so he could get to Ellie." The level of betrayal was staggering. My own brother had orchestrated this whole nightmare, had me sent to P. Arson, all because he was obsessed with my wife. I felt suck, then furious, then oddly calm. The pieces all fit together now. The convenient appearance of Lawson, Kevin's insistence that I confront him, his lackluster defense. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Maria explained that the DA was preparing charges against both Kevin and Lawson for conspiracy, among other things. More importantly for me, the judge had agreed to vacate my conviction based on the new evidence. I would be released pending a new trial, which might not even happen given what they now knew about the case. "You could be out as early as next week," Maria said, allowing herself a small smile. "I've already started the paperwork." I couldn't believe it. After months in this hellhole, I might actually go home. But home to what? Ellie was traumatized, our lives were in shambles, and my own brother had revealed himself to be a monster. The day before my release hearing, I got another visit from my mom. She looked like she'd aged years in the weeks since I'd seen her last, grief etched into every line of her face. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have seen what he was. I should have stopped him somehow." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the familiar softness of her skin. "This isn't your fault, Mom." She shook her head, squeezing my hand tightly. "I enabled him his whole life, made excuses, looked the other way, and now look what he's done. To you, to Ellie, to our family." We talked for a long time about Kevin, about growing up, about the signs we both missed or ignored. It was painful, but necessary, like lancing a wand. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. We weren't fixed, but maybe we were on the way to healing. The release hearing was surreal. I sat there in my prison jumpsuit, listening as the judge reviewed the evidence of Kevin's misconduct and conspiracy. Ellie was there, sitting with Maria, looking pale but determined. When the judge announced that my conviction was vacated and I was to be released immediately, she burst into tears. The processing took hours, but finally, I walked out of those gates, a free man. The sun felt impossibly bright, the air sweeter than I remembered. Ellie ran to me, and I held her tighter than I'd ever held anyone, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her tears soak through my shirt. "It's over," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Maria drove us to a hotel, not our apartment, which had long since been rented to someone else after we couldn't make rent. She explained that both Kevin and Lawson were in custody, but the case against them was just beginning. We would need to testify, to relive everything that had happened. That night, lying in the hotel bed with Ellie curled against me, I realized how much damage had been done. She flinched when I moved too quickly. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights, and I had my own demons now, the constant vigilance of P. Arson, the anger that simmered just below the surface. "We're going to get through this," I promised her, stroking her hair, "one day at a time." She nodded against my chest, and for the first time in months, she fell asleep without the lights on, safe in my arms. It wasn't the end of our nightmare, just the beginning of a long road to recovery. But we were together, and that was something Kevin had failed to destroy. The next morning, Maria called with news that the DA wanted to meet with us. They were building their case against Kevin and Lawson, and our testimony would be crucial. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing they would face justice, but also a deep sadness that it had come to this. Kevin was still my brother, despite everything. Part of me mourned the person I thought he was, even as I hated what he'd actually become. I headed to the DA's office with Ellie the next morning. The building was this massive concrete structure downtown with security checks that reminded me too much of P. Arson. Ellie held my hand the entire time, squeezing it whenever someone walked too close to us. I could feel her trembling slightly. The fluorescent lights in the hallway made her look even paler than she already was. The DA was this no-nonsense woman named Patricia, with short gray hair and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Her office was cluttered with stacks of files and law books, and she didn't waste time with small talk. "We have a strong case against both Kevin and Lawson," she told us, shuffling through some papers on her desk. "The emails between them are damning, and we found 3 other women who filed complaints against Kevin for similar behavior." I felt sick hearing that. 3 other women. How long had he been doing this? How many lives had he ruined before targeting Ellie? Patricia explained they were charging Kevin with conspiracy, tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, breaking and entering, and stalking. Lawson was being charged with sexual assault, conspiracy, and filing a false police report. "What about my case?" I asked. "Will I have to go through another trial?" Patricia shook her head. "Given the circumstances, we're dropping all charges against you. The paperwork should be finalized by the end of the week." I should have felt relieved, but honestly, I just felt numb. 6 months of my life gone because my own brother wanted my wife so badly he'd frame me. Ellie looked like she might throw up. "Will we have to testify?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most likely," Patricia said, her tone softening slightly. "But we'll do everything we can to make it as painless as possible." We left the DA's office with a stack of papers and instructions to stay available for further questioning. Outside, Ellie suddenly stopped walking and turned to me. "I can't do this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't face him in court. I can't talk about what he did with a room full of strangers staring at me." I pulled her into a hug right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw us. "We'll figure it out," I promised, though I had no idea how. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, police statements, and trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. We were staying at my mom's place temporarily, which was awkward but necessary since we had nowhere else to go. Mom was trying her best to make up for everything, cooking Ellie's favorite meals and giving us plenty of space when we needed it. One night, about 3 weeks after my release, I woke up to find Ellie's side of the bed empty. I panicked for a second before I heard her voice coming from the kitchen. I got up to check on her and found her sitting at the table with my mom, both of them crying over cups of tea. "I should have seen it," Mom was saying. "All those years, the way he talked about women, the complaints from his girlfriends. I just thought he was going through phases." Ellie reached across the table and took Mom's hand. "You couldn't have known what he'd do. None of us did." I stood in the doorway, watching them comfort each other, and felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Maybe something good could come from all this horror after all. The preliminary hearing for Kevin and Lawson was set for a month after my release. Maria advised us to prepare for an ugly fight. Kevin had hired some hotshot defense attorney who was already trying to paint Ellie as unstable and me as violent. "They're going to try to make it look like you have anger issues, and Ellie is making up stories to get you out of P. Arson," Maria warned us during a prep meeting in her office. "They'll bring up the fight, twist it to make it seem like you attacked Lawson unprovoked." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "What about the emails? The other victims?" "Those are our strongest points," Maria said, "but be prepared for character assassination. It's going to get personal." She wasn't kidding. The day before the hearing, a local news blog ran a story with anonymous sources claiming Ellie had been having an affair with Kevin. The article suggested she'd made up the assault allegations after I found out about their relationship. It was complete garbage, but seeing it in print made me want to pinch something. Ellie was devastated. "People are going to believe this," she said, staring at her phone in horror. "They're going to think I wanted this." I deleted the article from her phone and held her while she cried. "Anyone who knows you knows that's not true," I told her, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing her or myself. The morning of the hearing, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Ellie was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with this blank expression that scared me more than tears would have. She'd barely slept all night. "We don't have to do this," I told her, sitting up. "We could just leave, start over somewhere else." For a second, I saw a flicker of longing in her eyes. Then she shook her head. He doesn't get to win, not after everything he's done." We arrived at the courthouse an hour early. Maria met us outside, looking confident in a navy blue suit. She briefed us again on what to expect, but honestly, I was having trouble focusing. All I could think about was seeing Kevin again after everything that had happened. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. We sat behind the prosecutor's table, and I kept my arm around Ellie's shoulders. She was trembling slightly but holding it together. When they brought Kevin in, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, and his usually perfectly styled hair was a mess. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of one of his expensive suits. But what really got me was his eyes. When he spotted us, there was this flash of something, not remorse, more like frustration that his plan hadn't worked. Lawson came in separately. He looked scared, constantly glancing at Kevin like he was waiting for instructions. I felt my hands curling into fists at the sight of him, remembering how he'd grabbed Ellie, how how he'd smirked at me. The hearing itself was brutal. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, showing the emails, the testimony from the other women, the evidence from Kevin's apartment that showed he'd been stalking Ellie for months, photos of the rope and duct tape found in his car, screenshots of searches on his computer for things like how to make someone love you and untraceable sedatives. Kevin's lawyer tried to spin it all. He claimed Kevin had been trying to protect Ellie from me, that he'd found evidence I was abusive, but couldn't bring himself to use it against his own brother. He suggested the emails with Lawson were being misinterpreted, that Kevin had been investigating Lawson for another case. It was all bullshit, but he delivered it so smoothly, I could see some people in the courtroom nodding along. That's when I started to worry. What if they actually believed this crap? Then it was Ellie's turn to testify. She squeezed my hand before walking to the stand, her back straight despite her fear. The prosecutor started with gentle questions about our relationship, about Kevin's behavior after my arrest. Ellie's voice was quiet, but steady, as she described how he'd gradually become more possessive, how he'd isolated her from friends, how he'd started touching her in ways that made her uncomfortable. He told me no one would believe me, she said, her voice growing stronger. He said he was a respected lawyer, and I was just an emotional woman whose husband was in Pearson. Kevin's lawyer's cross-examination was vicious. He implied Ellie had led Kevin on, that she'd been unhappy in our marriage, that she'd invented the assault allegations when Kevin rejected her advances. I had to grip the bench to keep from jumping up. Isn't it true, the lawyer asked with this smug smile, that you told Mr. Reynolds you wished you'd married someone successful like him instead of his brother? Ellie looked him straight in the eye. I never said that. I loved my husband then, and I love him now. Kevin was the one who kept saying I deserved better, that I'd be happier with him. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but Ellie didn't break. When she finally stepped down, she was shaking, but there was this new strength in her eyes that I hadn't seen since before all this started. My testimony came next. I told the court everything, how Kevin had encouraged me to confront Lawson, how he'd promised evidence he never produced, how he'd manipulated the entire situation. Kevin stared at me the whole time, this cold, calculating look that made my skin crawl. His lawyer tried the same tactics with me, suggesting I had anger issues, that I'd attacked Lawson unprovoked, that I was jealous of Kevin's success. I kept my cool, remembering Maria's advice to stick to the facts and not let him provoke me. The most damning testimony came from one of the court clerks Kevin had worked with. She described how he'd asked her to misplace evidence in my case, promising to help her son get into law school in exchange. She'd kept emails and text messages from him, which the prosecutor entered into evidence. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but hopeful. The judge seemed skeptical of Kevin's defense, asking pointed questions whenever his lawyer tried to spin things. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to proceed to trial on all charges against both defendants. Bail is denied for Mr. Reynolds due to the serious nature of the charges and the risk to the victims. I felt Ellie sag against me in relief. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Kevin's face as they led him away was a mask of fury. He looked at Ellie one last time, and the hatred in his eyes made me pull her closer. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us with questions. Maria fielded most of them while we hurried to her car. Once inside, Ellie finally broke down, sobbing against my shoulder. You did amazing in there, I told her, stroking her hair. I'm so proud of you. The trial was set for 3 months later. Those months were hard but healing in a way. We found a small apartment to rent, and I got a job at a warehouse. The pay wasn't great, but it felt good to be working again, to be providing for us. Ellie started therapy, which seemed to be helping. Some nights she still woke up screaming, but those episodes became less frequent. My mom visited often, bringing food and helping us furnish the apartment with stuff from her house. She and Ellie grew closer, bonding over their shared trauma. Sometimes I'd come home to find them laughing in the kitchen, and for a moment, things would feel almost normal. The trial itself lasted 2 weeks. More details emerged about Kevin's obsession with Ellie, journals going back years, photos he'd taken of her without her knowledge, even recordings of our phone conversations from Pearson. It was like discovering my brother had been replaced by a stranger long ago, and I'd never noticed. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both Kevin and Lawson. Kevin got 15 years, Lawson got 8. As they led Kevin away, he looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, just cold hatred. I realized then that I'd lost my brother long before any of this happened. After the sentencing, Ellie and I decided to move. Too many bad memories in this city. We found a small town a few hours away, close enough to visit my mom, but far enough that no one knew our story. I got a job at a construction company, and Ellie started taking classes at the community college. It's been a year now since the trial. We're doing better, though some days are still hard. Ellie still flinches sometimes when someone moves too quickly near her. I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I'm back in that cell, but we're healing, day by day. Last week, we went to dinner at this little Italian place in town. On the walk home, Ellie took my hand and stopped under a streetlight. You know what I realized? She said, looking up at me with clear eyes. You really would die for me, but more importantly, you know how to live for me too. I pulled her close, feeling her heart hit against mine. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, before continuing home. Not perfect, but together, and that's enough.